Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Laura Prada from the Telesur Studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. We start in Mexico, where on Saturday, Andrés Manuel López Obrador was sworn in as president. At the ceremony before the Congress and heads of state, Enrique Peña Nieto removed his presidential sash, a symbol of the Mexican president, and delivered it to the president of the Congress, who then presented López Obrador with the sash. He was sworn in, starting his 6-year term with strong majorities in both houses of Congress.
Protesto.
I swear to defend the Constitution of the United Mexican States and its laws, and faithfully and patriotically carry out the post of President of the Republic that the people have entrusted to me.
Que de ella emanen la cuarta transformación política de México.
Today, we begin the fourth political transformation of Mexico. It may seem pretentious or exaggerated, but today, not only does a new government begin, but also a change of political regime begins.
Un cambio de régimen político.
After the official swearing act took place, crowds gathered at Zócalo Square in Mexico City for López Obrador inauguration before indigenous leaders and social movements, being the first president to be part of a traditional indigenous cleansing ceremony. Mexican citizens and tourists can now visit Los Pinos residence, which was the former presidential house. Doors will open to the public from this Saturday, as promised by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. This change pretends to save money while AMLO lived in an apartment at the presidential palace. In addition, López Obrador will just earn 40% of the salary Enrique Peña Nieto perceived.
Visiting the presidential residence as a common Mexican for the first time is history in the making, because even when it was considered the people's house, it's something we didn't get to visit.
Also in Mexico, trade unions and social movement hosted a solidarity event with Venezuela. The meeting was held at the headquarters of the Mexican Union of Electricians. Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza and the Minister of Culture Ernesto Villegas attended the gathering, in which the Minister Arreaza delivered a message sent by President Nicolás Maduro to Mexico's working class.
We saw in the face, in the words, in the reflections of working-class Mexicans during these years a lot of strength. However, we saw them in a position of resistance, which is of course logical, often suppressing or holding back what the neoliberal governments were doing. The union workers of the electricity sector are an example of how the previous government privatized the sector and got rid of all the workers, and you have all resisted and have reorganized and restructured, and now you are at the front of social struggles and at the front of the union struggles in Mexico.
I would like to send my regards to all of the union leaders, to the leaders of social movements, to the academics, to those fighting for social justice who have organised this important event. I've been able to visit Mexico and I've had the satisfaction to see the love and solidarity in the eyes of the people. I felt it in the streets of Mexico. From the very moment we arrived, we immediately received love from the people.
On Andrés Manuel López Obrador's first official act after assuming government, he talked about a program to address the actual migrant crisis. The program will include a coordinated operation between the 3 levels of government in Mexico and also with his Central American neighbors. The plan includes a review of shelters and the reinforcement of security measures. On Saturday night, López Obrador said that the provision of basic supplies and decent place to stay would be necessary. Members of the Central American migrant caravan were transferred by bus to a new shelter, miles away from the border to a dangerous neighborhood. The temporary shelter, Benito Juárez Sport Complex, was shut down by Tijuana's authorities. Officials will no longer be offering food or medical care at the facility. Thousands of migrants stayed at the shelter, which became unsanitary following heavy rains and flooding. Many migrants are refusing to move to the new shelter because it is located on the most dangerous part of Tijuana. Some say the new location stands in the way of their efforts to request asylum as collective. Instead, they are camping outside of the closed shelter. Now we go to Tijuana, where our correspondent Alina Duarte updates us.
We continue here in the border city of Tijuana, a few meters away from the border crossing known as El Chaparral. Here, 15 migrants are holding a hunger strike which began on November 29th. They are demanding that the government of the United States receive their asylum requests in a shorter period of time. There are hundreds more who also send their asylum requests. However, authorities don't have the capacity of processing the requests in a timely manner, making things more difficult for the migrants.
Time for a break. Hearing from the South, you can find us on Twitter at Telesur English and my personal account, Laura P. Telesur. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Colombia, another two social leaders from the Agua indigenous community were killed in the southern department of Nariño. Armed men shot Héctor Garcia, his son Arturo Garcia, and another 4 members of the community were seriously injured. Arturo Garcia was recently elected as governor of the local indigenous reservation on the previous night. According to the Colombian National Indigenous Organization, 12 indigenous leaders have been killed in that same municipality. Meanwhile, Venezuela gets ready for the December 9th municipal elections. The president of the National Electoral Council, Tibisay Lucena, confirmed at a press conference that preparations are running smoothly. Over 2,000 conciliars will be elected on that day. But let's hear what she specifically said.
So far, we have already executed 85% of the process for election, particularly the delivery of machines. We finished the production of all material necessary, and voting machines are already going out to the regions. On Tuesday, we will go to schools, and by Friday, we will install electoral tables. So, if anything is missing, we have until Saturday to correct it. All in all, by Friday, we will have all our tables ready for Sunday 6 a.m. The Electoral Bureau, as established by the law.
The G20 summit ended in Buenos Aires with China's Xi Jinping making some of the most significant diplomatic progress. The Chinese president agreed with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump to declare a temporary truce on their trade war. The U.S. president decided to restrict the planned tariffs on Chinese goods, while Xi promised to buy more American products. Also, he agreed to deepen trilateral cooperation with Russia and India. During the summit, the Russian and Turkish presidents agreed on a series of measures to comply with the demilitarized zone agreement in the Syrian province of Idlib. Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan agreed that not all extremists are meeting the demand to leave. According to the Russian Chancellor Sergei Lavrov, they will work with Turkey to ensure that the agreement is enforced and prevent armed groups from breaking it. The Syrian armed conflict dates back to March 2011. Idlib is one of the last rebel-held areas which the Syrian government aims to regain in order to declare the outright victory. The G20 summit ended this Saturday in Buenos Aires, while social organizations demonstrated throughout the streets to reject the attendance of the world's most powerful countries and their neoliberal policies. More on this story.
Peoples from around Argentina and around the world gathered in Buenos Aires to take to the streets in demonstrations against the G20 summit. They took on the task of confronting the world's most powerful.
This People's Summit aims to let them know that they are in fact reinforcing the attacks on the world's working population. Macron has said that he wants to discuss how this government can advance with labor reform. He's putting that ahead of youth and also ahead of workers. It seems that for them this is the only way that has occurred to them as a way to get out of this capitalist crisis. Of course, they are going to fail.
Their protests were reflected on hundreds of banners and posters that said no to the G20, down with the International Monetary Fund, and Trump and other imperialist leaders out. Protesters marched in defiance of threats by the Argentine government, despite the government's warnings that it would repress protesters.
In a city that has been emptied and militarized, it's very important that people demonstrated to say to those who think they own the planet that we don't want a world where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. We don't want a world where people have to go from country to country looking for work and trying to find their way out of hunger. We don't want them to continue to make plans which worsen the situation. That's why we are here on the streets.
More than 22,000 security policemen were mobilized in order to shield the capital of Argentina. Despite the difficulty of reaching the city's downtown, the protests exceeded all expectations. Activists and people from all over the world came to Buenos Aires to be present and march against the most powerful.
This is a very important and momentous mobilization for workers because this G20 is going to discuss the future of work, but workers aren't invited to the discussion. This is why I say G20 out.
Here we have the social movements and workers of Latin America to tell the world that another world is possible and that the strategy lies in Latin America unity and the peoples of the world.
More than 100 social organizations marched to the perimeter of the National Congress, where a document rejecting the G20's leader forum was read aloud. Their message was no to the model of looting and exclusion that concentrates more and more resources in fewer hands and forces people of the world into hunger.
We move on. The coalition of parties in Uruguay's government held its 7th Congress and approved the nominees as presidential candidates for next year's elections. 4 candidates were approved to stand in internal elections to decide who will be the official candidate for the Uruguayan left. Around 1,500 delegates discussed in 5 subcommittees the policies the left will propose to achieve in what would be its 4th consecutive government to win the upcoming elections. The party is committed to achieving gender equality and strengthening the social care system, as well as environmental sustainability.
I think it's a good Congress. More than 1,500 participants in a country of 3 million inhabitants is a political force that rises the unity of the left. With debate, the left is building from the debate of ideas. It's a feature of all of us who ever get together to a base committee. The difference of doing politics, the left has a way of doing politics which I think must be maintained, which is to summon the people to organize in the territory. We live in the age of knowledge. This implies more and more how a country is rich or poor, according to its capacity to generate knowledge, to add value and scientific technology development, which implies the challenge of an educational of excellence.
Attorneys plan to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of passengers who were injured on the flight Jamaica's crash landing at Guyana's airport on November 9th. A Toronto-based law firm is seeking compensation for passengers and their families. One of the 82 Canadian passengers on the board, the Toronto-bound flight, died a week after the aircraft skidded off the runway upon landing. The Canadian law firm is representing 4 passengers from the Toronto area. Time for a second break here in Telesur. Please follow us.
Enjoy our programming from Monday to Friday, where you'll find the best information on culture, innovation, conservation, human well-being. Keep up to date on the latest innovations in science and technology with Atomun. The habits and knowledge you need to live a healthy lifestyle are on Guide Your Body. Environmental consciousness is required to preserve our Earth. Undergo your transformation on Green Zone. All about equity, diversity, and respect for identities on By Gender. Cultural manifestations, the art in all its forms, and the stories of real lives. Every day we feature a wide variety of content. Only on Telesur, the news source from Latin America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. Several Syrian Arab armies positions have been attacked by the U.S. international coalition, resulting in material damage. The strikes were carried out near the city of Sokne, 80 kilometers from the Asian city of Palmyra. The Syrian government condemned the offensive. International coalition forces have repeatedly attacked Syria since last April, drawing criticism of acting as the air force from the various armed rebels groups trained by and armed by the U.S. President Emmanuel Macron has held a crisis meeting after anti-government protests broke out in Paris, which left hundreds of people injured and caused destruction across the capital. The so-called Yellow Vest protest escalated into violent riots in Paris, with hooded groups torching cars, buildings, and looting shops. Over 400 people were arrested. The government is considering calling in a state of emergency to prevent further riots. The movement began in mid-November, first against rising fuel taxes, but it quickly turned into a widespread opposition towards Macron's economic reforms.
That's just what I think, and for me, that's the problem. That's all the problem. That Macron, he loves the powerful, he loves the big bosses, he loves the big financiers, he loves very rich people, as Holland said, but he doesn't care about the people. Not only does he not like them, he also despises them. That is it. That's why we are here. All the vandalism. It's sad. What was done at the Arc of Triomphe. It's sad, but for me, the first person to blame is Mr. Macron. That's what I think.
We continue in Europe. On Saturday, hundreds of people attended an annual conference bringing together high-profile speakers from Latin America with trade unionists and other members of British society in order to discuss events in Latin America and how British society can offer its solidarity. This story is brought by our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete.
With over 50 speakers, including campaigners, politicians, trade unionists and academics from across Latin America and the UK, the annual Latin America 2018 conference took place in London on Saturday. Featuring films, stalls, music and discussion, this day of plenary sessions and workshops aims to increase awareness about the major issues affecting Latin America and strengthen British solidarity with the region.
We've been running this conference now for 14 years, over 500 people coming together. The people of Latin America need our solidarity more than ever. So we're really pleased to understand the realities of what's going on in Latin America and be able to develop movements of solidarity with the peoples there for their national self-determination and their sovereignty.
The hundreds that attended the conference were offered workshops covering issues such as the rise of fashion in Brazil with the election of Jair Bolsonaro, progressive youth movements in Latin America, the threat that Donald Trump has for the region, and the state of the peace agreement in Colombia.
So the British trade union movement has been a huge source of solidarity for Colombia. They've founded Justice for Colombia, the organisation which has worked for many years to support the improvement of human rights, to campaign against the killings of trade union leaders, of left-wing activists, of human rights defenders. They've also supported our work to support the peace process in Colombia.
The event saw the participation of a number of MPs from the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, who has a significant record of solidarity with progressive causes in Latin America. Corbyn himself was in Mexico as a special guest of Andrés Manuel López Obrador for his inauguration as president on the same day as the conference.
And I think there are lessons to be learned, lessons to be learned in terms of some of the great progressive steps and the leaps forward that have been made in Latin America, but also I think to learn from some of the mistakes as well, and how the very extreme right-wing establishment can actually, regain power and set back and overturn, the progressive moves that have been made, the improvements in the quality of life for ordinary working-class peoples.
The current divisions in the British government over Brexit raise the very real prospect of a general election and Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. And that means the debates around the successes and challenges of really existing progressive governments in Latin America are more relevant than ever in the UK. Pablo Navarrete, Telesur, London.
Telesur spoke to British Labour MP Chris Williamson about the Latin America 2018 conference.
We've seen significant progressive developments in Latin America, but regrettably in recent times we've seen some setbacks in places like Argentina, in Brazil, most notably recently in Honduras and so on. But we've also seen, and indeed today, we're seeing the inauguration of the new president in Mexico.
The United Nations Climate Summit, or COP24, has kicked off in Poland. With delegates from nearly 200 countries, COP24 will focus on tackling political divisions on climate change since landmark 2015 Paris deal. Let's remember that in 2017, US President Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and that just last week, President-elect Jair Bolsonaro from Brazil canceled hosting next COP meeting.
The effects that are happening are affecting communities around the world, casualties, destruction in so many places, suffering, a lot of suffering derived from the consequences of climate change. Just make it, really make our work more urgent.
We must provide assurance of the delivery of pre-2020 commitments, particularly finance, and the joint mobilization of $100 billion by 2020 to ensure effective access of resources, particularly by vulnerable countries.
Like this, we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find this and more news on our website, telesurenglish.net, where you can find opinion articles and special interviews. Until next time, thank you for watching.